Today I'm chatting to my close friend Briget Kelly, who left a public service job to build her business as an end-of-life doula. I'm going to talk about you as if you're not here, but okay.
That's okay.
What I like about her business journey so far is that it's a gentle one, and she's growing her business with her own pacing, and from what I understand, she's learning a lot about herself in that process. Briget is all for helping people through their fears around death, and I think our friendship has even helped me from that point of view. And I've never been a fan of talking about death in detail, and I think there's been a shift since I met Briget. So we're going to explore that and a lot more. So hi, Briget.
Hi, Jen. Thanks for having me here.
Thanks for being here. So let's start with, what is an end-of-life doula exactly, and what led you to consider becoming one?
Sure. So an end-of-life doula is sometimes called a death doula, or there are other similar terms as well. Doula means to be of service, and so an end-of-life doula supports people at the end of life. But that being said, there's a very broad range of help that an end-of-life doula can give to people. So that might be just helping somebody prepare an advance care directive and their will and some of those more legal documents. For other people, it might be going through their end of life if they have a terminal illness or something like that, and being with them right up until the end, and perhaps even supporting family and friends after they've died with bereavement as well. It depends what people want and what resources they already have. And part of an end-of-life doula's role is just to be that extra pair of hands to support that person with what they want and need, and to help them have more choice and control over their end of life.
Mm-hmm. And so with your experiences so far, is the role like what you expected?
Yeah, well, you mentioned that I've started my business gently, and so I haven't had a lot of experience as yet with people at the end of life. I've certainly done training and have had lots of conversations with people, and doing some of those other roles of an end-of-life doula, which is things like education and awareness, and building what we call death literacy, which is just helping people to become more comfortable with talking about death and dying.
Death literacy.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I haven't journeyed, for want of a better term, with many people when they're actually dying.
Is that something you want to do more of? So what do you want to delve into?
Look, I think there's so many different experiences that you can have with people at the end of life, and because people's needs are so varied and different, I'm open to whatever comes along for me. So I do have some personal experience with people at the end of life, and that's partly what brought me to become an end-of-life doula, which I just realised was one of your first questions.
Yeah.
So I feel comfortable being in that space, even if I haven't actually had the direct experience of being there when somebody's actually died, or had some particular experience that I haven't experienced myself.
I think with what you've chosen to do, being comfortable in that space is key. Like,
I agree.
yeah.
It's not for everybody.
So you and I are big music fans, and yesterday there was the death of Tina Turner.
Yep.
And I was just doing some reading, and apparently because of her kidney issues, she was ready to be involved with an assisted suicide group called Excerpt. And naturally I thought of you, because you're the only person I know of that's had direct experience with voluntary assisted dying.
Yeah.
And I know there's different names for that process. So are there any distinct differences between?
Yeah, so in different countries around the world where there is this kind of opportunity for some people to end their life on their terms, there are different names for it in different countries. And a lot of that really comes down to the legislation that is behind that ability to end people's lives, and also I think from what I understand, the extent of involvement from the medical community as well. And that's why there's different terminologies between different countries. So assisted suicide is what Exit uses, but other countries use voluntary euthanasia, legally assisted dying, physician-assisted dying. In Australia, we use voluntary assisted dying. Yeah.
Should we quickly talk about how we met?
Yeah, why not? Yeah. Do you want to start it off, or do you want me to?
I think you should.
All right. Well, we are school mums, and we met when our sons were in reception. And the first meeting that I remember with Jen is we were walking back to our cars after doing the school drop-off, and at the time I was going through chemo because I've had cancer before, and I was wearing a beanie or a scarf. I'm not quite sure what it was. Jen might remember. She's more of a
You're
fashionista.
all in white. All in white. Yeah.
Right, and I don't know how we got to talking about it, but I'm pretty open about most things in my life, and certainly about cancer. And I just mentioned that to Jen, and I just remember her reaction. She was just immediately so caring and compassionate, and got quite teary, and was really just so concerned. And
my breath got caught in my throat because I'd actually never met, up until that point, never met anyone that had gone through chemo.
Right, yeah.
Or, was going through cancer. And so after I learned about your pivotal health experiences and the caregiving roles that you've taken on in your life, I quickly established that you are a life warrior of some sort and that you've got superhuman emotional strength. And it made a huge amount of sense to me that you stepped into an end-of-life doula role. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you.
And, even at that time, about a year ago, when I saw that non-fiction book at your place, which was called The Lost Art of Dying,
Yep.
I thought to myself, yep, that's Briget. That's clearly what makes her tick. But this got me thinking about overarching themes in our life and how most of us have to overcome some sort of prominent issue. I think for me, not always, but sometimes we have an overarching theme. And for me, I think it's independence, which is another story for another day. Do you think yours is grief?
Yeah, I think it's probably only recently that I've really understood that it is grief. But when I look back over my life and see some of the challenges that I've had, even if I was to put another name to those challenges, at the heart of those experiences is grief and loss. And, so things like the death of my mum when I was 26, and having cancer, and having other physical and mental illness that has really affected my life, and having to deal with the loss of perhaps what might have been in my life, or the fact that I've ended up taking different paths, and so I've had to let go of some of the ideas of how I thought my life might turn out. My nan, who I was very close to, who actually lived a very long life, but did have dementia at the end, which changes the relationship that you have with somebody. So I can definitely see that there's been, a lot of loss and grief in my life, different forms of it. Yeah.
When you spoke to me recently, I don't know if you want to get into this, but was it the tarot person that said?
The kinesiologist.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
yeah. And she mentioned that that's my soul contract, so that's, if you believe in reincarnation and those kinds of things, if we're here to learn a lesson or, to do something in this iteration of life, then I think that grief is the lesson that I need to learn.
Just going back to music, I know that you've already thought about songs that you want to have played at your funeral.
Yeah.
And I remember the first time we talked about it, and I had a pretty dismissive attitude to it all because it just felt superstitious to me, like I'd be preempting things if I thought about it.
Yes.
Do you want to share the 5 songs that
I
you
have
on
to
your list?
open my book up though because
It's okay.
I can't
I'll take
quite remember them.
a sip of coffee while
Oh,
you're doing that.
I might have a sip of coffee too. I guess the first one that I like is it's actually an instrumental piece by Hans Zimmer, and it's from one of my favourite movies, which is True Romance, and it's actually called You're So Cool, but I didn't actually realise that until after I'd chosen it as my funeral song, but I love the fact that that's the name of it. And I just love this piece because it's not really morbid, but it's not really upbeat either. It's I don't know, I've always loved that piece of music right from when I first saw the movie. It's one of the main things I remember about that movie.
Can I just interrupt for once? Because I listened to it. I knew you were going to say this song, and I listened to it again last night. And it's so you, and it's really joyful.
It is.
It's a really joyful piece, and I was getting emotional while I was listening to it, and I had to tell myself to chill out. Bridget's not dead yet.
I think it does have a certain nostalgia to it though as well, even though it's got that joyfulness to it. And again, after I had already chosen this as a funeral piece, but I found out that it was written for 9 marimbas, and 9 is my favourite number, and I think marimbas are a beautiful instrument. So, but another song that I really would love to have at my funeral is Hymn to Her. It's by the Pretenders, and I've always loved that song, and it just speaks to me a lot, and it ties in with my own spirituality. But there's also another version of that song done by some Australian women, and I love that version equally, partly because of those Australian women. They're women that I think are just amazing artists. So there's Katie Noonan and Deborah Conway, and Angie Hart, and some other women as well. And
You've always been a big supporter of Australian music artists.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. Another song that I would love to have at my funeral is a Cat Empire song, and it's called All Night Loud. And it's all about, them being musicians and playing all night loud, and the relationship with the crowd and with the band, but I just see it as a metaphor for life. And I just would love to have that at the end of my funeral. But look, there's a few others here that I don't know if I would have them at my funeral, but they're on the list just in case. One's called On the Radio by Regina Spektor. The other one is Forever Young by Youth Group. Or there's a few people have done Forever Young, but I like the Youth Group version. And a song called Meet Me in the Middle of the Air by Paul Kelly. It's got very religious Christian overtones. It's actually got words from, I think they're probably from Psalms. I certainly recognise them from my Catholic upbringing. And so actually that kind of goes against what I would ordinarily like, but I've heard that song done live as well. That's where I first heard that song, and it was just so moving, and And every time I hear a different version of it, it's very artistic and it's quite powerful, even though it's quite simple.
I'm going to put the songs in the show notes for people to, if they want to look them up, then
cool.
they can. I still can't bring myself to seriously think about songs I would have, but there's probably going to be a Pearl Jam or an Elvis song in there. But I can tell you what I won't be having, and that's, the English version is Time to Say Goodbye. The Italian version is, do I say in my European pronunciation, Conte Partiró by Andrea Bocelli. Conte Partiró.
That's how I would say it.
Do you know the song?
I know the song, yes, yeah. Although I only just understood what the words actually meant. I've heard it played at funerals, but I never actually knew what the words were until I looked it up.
It is the song for, like, within my Italian community. You know, every funeral I've been to, that song gets played. And the first time I heard it was at my grandfather's funeral, and it was, to me, it just spelt death. And for a while, I couldn't hear it because all I could picture was the lowering of the casket. And then I listened to it again this morning, and I can almost, like, you can see these black clouds in human form coming to, like, accentuate the grief and sadness in people. That's what I get out of the song.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I just wanted to talk about that because thanks to you, I've realised that we don't have to choose these extremely solemn, sad songs that, you know, that are designed to keep us in that misery.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So,
well, I think there's a few things with that, Jen, because now that I've read the words to that song, even though it is a solemn and sad song, and I completely understand how you feel when you hear it, the words are quite, I don't know if hopeful is the right word, but, you know, it's really about being together in spirit even after somebody's died. And so that's really quite beautiful and quite a lovely sentiment. And I think part of the reason why people have really sad, very hard-hitting songs at funerals is because it's good to be able to access those feelings of sadness and grief. And it's hard for people to do that. So if music can take you to that place, even though that's an uncomfortable feeling for us, it's actually good for our grieving process to actually feel those emotions and access those emotions and process them. And so those sad songs have their place. But for me, I also feel like for a funeral is not only a way to really help the grieving process, but definitely a celebration of a person's life. And so for that reason, I agree with you. It's great to have other types of music that aren't necessarily all kind of sad and doom and gloom, because having music that celebrates that person's life is, such a positive thing.
yeah. And it is such a hauntingly beautiful song. Like, I tried to listen to it without thinking about, you know, my grandfather's funeral, and then, you know, I tried to rewire it. I was like, what if I was, I don't know, doing everything backwards while this song was playing? Like, you know, because it's just the memory association.
Yes.
Yes, I wanted to put this out to anyone that's listening. If you have thought about your songs that you want played at your funeral, let me know on social what they would be, because I would love to hear that.
Yeah, I'd love to. I'll keep track of that myself and see what people put down.
So continuing with death and music, with Tina Turner, but also at the beginning of May, one of my favourite artists, Gordon Lightfoot, died, and I had never met anyone that had gushed over his music like I did, so it made me a bit sad, but to not really, I wasn't really able to, I had to, go online and read all the tributes that were kind of pouring in about him, and that made me feel less alone. But I just wanted to know if, were there any musicians whose death you clearly remember?
Yeah, I've been finding, I guess we're getting a bit older. So the older we get, then those musicians that we've grown up with, it's only natural that they're going to die. So certainly over the last few years, there's been, quite a few musicians that have been really part of my childhood and young adulthood. Well, their music has been anyway, and they've died. And I've found myself just kind of having my own little ceremony, I guess, and having, like, playing their music and just, spending a bit of time celebrating their life and their legacy and their music. And I try and play it for my son as well, so that he can learn something about quality music. But I guess for me, a lot of it is, there's the sadness, but there's also that gratefulness that those people and I guess for me, those artists were in the world and were able to make such amazing music and share that with the world. So that's what I tend to take away from when musicians die. But I have to say, when David Bowie died, I would never have called myself a huge fan. I liked David Bowie, but I had never seen him live, and certainly couldn't name all of his albums and that kind of thing. But I just felt compelled to play his music every day after he died for about 6 to 8 weeks. It was just, it was like there was something whispering in my head, you have to play David Bowie. And I would just, like every day play some David Bowie. So
I think the whole world felt that one. Yeah. So I just wanted to mention this as well, because we've tried to make this interview happen before.
Yeah.
And I had felt like our past efforts just weren't really us, and more my issue. I just wasn't myself during the interview, and so we're here again today. And I wanted to say that you've been pretty instrumental in my startup phase as a podcast host, as I try to feel around for what my style is. And I just wanted to thank you for that, first of all. But one of the reasons that I felt like I couldn't make the interview work before was because I was trying too hard to make the death theme fit into this show with its premise of creativity. And then recently you gave me the reminder that death is like constantly explored in art form. And I mean, I can't name any artists that haven't touched on death in one way or another. So first of all, it amused me that I couldn't think of that before. But with that in mind, let's move on to books, which is my jam because I'm a writer. And you gave me a list of books that you've read recently that touch on death. I've got that list here. What did you want to... Do you want me to say your list?
Yeah, you say it while I have a coffee.
Okay, yep. So we've got Cloudstreet, Bridge to Terabithia. Did I say that right? Yeah. The Harry Potter books, especially Deathly Hallows, Our Shimmering Skies, The Dictionary of Lost Words, and Moonstone. I'm going to, again, put these details in the show notes afterwards. But I'm curious, when you read about death in fiction, do you sometimes get insights that you can apply to your role as a doula?
Yeah, definitely I do. In some ways it's perhaps quite subtle, but I still think it's really relevant. I find now when I'm reading, or even if I'm reading lyrics or other forms of art as well, when I see death, I view it in a slightly different way. So sometimes it's that I can really relate to it, and so when I'm seeing it in that art form, particularly literature, I'm really, I guess it's helping me to process my own grief and my own experiences, and to consolidate those experiences a bit more, or to feel into them a little bit more. And there's then those other experiences that I read about that I haven't experienced in my life. And although grief is different for everybody, seeing a different experience of grief in that form of literature helps me to learn about what it might be like for someone to go through that experience. And so that really, I feel, helps me to be more empathetic and more understanding of those experiences. So I feel like I get a lot out of reading.
Yeah. And again, for the listeners out there, books that you've read that touch on death that have really moved you, I would love to hear about those. So let me know on social. Back to your list. Moonstone sounds interesting. Who wrote that?
Well, Moonstone's a book by a new up-and-coming author by the name of Genevra, Siciliano.
Thank you for reading it, by the way.
It was my pleasure. I started reading it and I couldn't stop, and I was actually surprised at the not the amount of death, but that there were some elements of death that I wasn't expecting from Jen.
Yeah, and it was really surprising to hear you say that, because you'd always given me shit about never wanting to talk about death. Maybe it was just easier for me to explore through characters. Okay, enough about me. Your business is called Rhiannon Service.
Yeah.
Tell us the significance of that name, and why didn't you call your business your own name?
Well, I've never had a business before. It's a very new thing for me to be a sole trader. And as much as I very much feel like my business is about me and about my human experience and about me guiding other people with my human experience. So I just thought, well, I'll just wait and the name will come to me. And so much of the development of my business has been intuitive, and that's come to me through various means, through just thoughts that I have, and meditation, and cards and crystals, and kinesiology sessions, and coincidences, and all kinds of things. And one of those things was I was guided to do some goddess guidance oracle cards, which I've never had. I'd had in my house for about 2 years, but I'd never actually used before. But I just felt this strong need one day to get these cards out and have a bit of a play with them. And in doing that, I pulled out several cards, and every goddess that I pulled out had a message to me that really just resonated with me. And in the end, I pulled out 9 cards. I mentioned before, 9's my favourite number. And I just had this strong feeling that even though every card I pulled out had real significance, that the number 9 card was going to be the most important card. And when I pulled out the number 9 card, it was Rhiannon.
I hold it up for you.
The book has a little thing about the goddess, and there was just this sentence that was just so relevant to what I wanted to do about Rhiannon. It says, "She lovingly carries souls from earth to the afterlife plane upon her trusty white horse, helping them adjust to the transition of life after death." And it was perfect. And I just felt like my name had to have something to do with Rhiannon. And the fact that doula means service, to be of service, I thought that Rhiannon's service was a really...
So it came together.
Yeah.
So you are someone that carefully and deeply considers the significance of things, like everything. And let's take your son's, his beautiful artwork that you used for your business card.
Yeah.
Just tell us, about this painting, like why it was perfect for Rhiannon's service.
Yeah. Well, again, I kept on getting intuition. I had this picture up in my house, and I just kept on getting drawn to this picture and thinking I need to use that as my business card, or but the more I looked at it, the more I realised there was a lot of symbolism in that. And so even though this tree is dead, I don't know if you can see, but at the base of it there's these little flowers growing. There's actually a couple of branches on the tips that still have new leaves, and then it has the path along the side which is just going into the horizon. And to me that's actually about life and death. That path could be going to the other world or the afterlife. It could be going to a new life. It could be the path of somebody's life from birth to death. And even just the colours of the sky, I just think are so beautiful. And they're not actually, you don't really know what time of day it is. It could be morning, it could be evening, I just think there's so much symbolism in there.
I love the vibrancy of it as well. I will also put I'll put a picture of that in the show notes too, so you guys can see it. And so knowing you and your style, and you mentioned symbolism before, you're someone that you do pay attention to signs, and you seem to recognise that feeling, that knowing feeling when you perceive something as a sign, which then like activates your intuition. And like even the way that you named your business is an example of that. So what I wanted to ask you is when it comes to decision making, if intuition is one tool, tarot is another. I think I had read my first tarot card with you.
Yeah, that's right.
And you also use the pendulum sometimes.
Yes,
So can you please tell us about that?
A few years ago I started to use the pendulum. I again, like the goddess cards actually, I'd had it sitting there for a couple of years, but I hadn't actually used it. And I actually started using it for a very specific thing, which was related to some dietary kinds of things. But once I started becoming more familiar with using it, then I started using it for other things as well. And like all of these tools, I take them all with a grain of salt. I believe that my intuition is what's most important, not these tools. But they do just help to reinforce.
Yeah.
Sometimes can look at something from a slightly different perspective, or make me think about something that I haven't maybe considered in that decision. So I find the pendulum quite useful at times. Yeah.
I've only had one pendulum experience, and it wasn't a positive one like yours have been. Mine was actually really scary. And I was in primary school, and my cousin and I were being silly. Like we were just asking it a bunch of silly questions, and we were laughing about it. And so we weren't really being respectful of the process. And I still remember the way the pendulum just swung out of control in her hand, and I knew that she wasn't orchestrating it. And we put that shit away. And we were like, thank you, pendulum. We are now done for life. So I, admire that you were able to use it in more controlled conditions. But yeah, it wasn't for me.
Yeah, I understand that, because I had a similar experience also when I was young with a Ouija board. And it really scared me too. So I think you need to use what's comfortable.
Yeah. So the philosophical phrase Memento Mori, it translates as remember death or remember you die.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a stoic thing. And I turn to it as a kind of strategy sometimes when I can't decide what I need to get done in my business or other parts of my life. And I was wondering what your thoughts were, like whether you used it for anchoring, I guess. But then I realised in your line of work, most of the time you're coming into contact with people that are already facing death, and they don't really need more anchoring. They're kind of already there. And are you helping them move through that stuck, fearful stage?
Yeah, well, there's a few things in there, Jen. I think not everybody who is at the end of life is necessarily stuck in their acceptance of death and dying or their grief. Certainly some people do get stuck, and there's a lot of different ways that people might get unstuck, but ultimately it's that individual person's journey, and I can only guide them so much. Or I would say the end of life doula's role is to really empower people to try to work through that. And in terms of the Memento Mori, I can't say I know what it is you're talking about, but I can't say it's something I've used myself, really. But that concept of knowing that you're going to die, I'm certainly familiar with that. But I think for someone with the experience that I've had, where you've actually had to face death at a younger age, I've had that Memento Mori moment, and then I've kind of worked past it. And so
are you saying that you've never really needed it?
It's not that I've never needed it. I think it's just that I've worked through that, and now I've gone to a different place. Mm-hmm. So when I had cancer the second time, I certainly had, a lot of thought and a grieving process of recognizing that I might not live a long life, and that, that I could die, really quite young. And I processed that in 4 days while I was actually in hospital, which doesn't sound like a long time, but it was it was an amazing I had time to myself to process it without interruption from visitors, and I didn't have people kind of telling me what to think, and I was
actually, the more I think about it, 4 days on your own with zero is actually a long time.
Yes.
Think about it.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. And especially because, in your hospital, there's really not much you can do. And actually, I was in a ward with other people, and there was this woman on my ward who was an older woman, and she'd been seriously injured, and, they didn't know if she was going to pull through. And we actually had some really amazing conversations over those 4 days. And they really had a big impact on me. And I really came out of that 4 days with a much better appreciation that I was going to die, and whether that was in a year or 20 years or whenever that was, that I could accept that and understand that. And I guess I evolved beyond that Memento Mori kind of concept. And my little mantra, I guess, became here for a good time, not a long time.
This week you went to a death cafe. Mm. So personally, I wouldn't be caught dead there. Sorry, mum joke. But yeah, tell us what that was like.
Yeah, I've been wanting to go to a death cafe for a good couple of years, and I haven't been able to get to it. So it was really fascinating for me, and I was so glad to be there. What a death cafe is an opportunity and a space for people to be with people with perhaps a similar interest or perhaps need to be able to talk about death and dying for some reason, without there being that judgment or that awkwardness, or certainly you can have the emotion, but it's expected because you're talking about death. And for some people, especially people that have either maybe been a carer for somebody, or who have maybe had a terminal illness for a long time, or perhaps older people and just wanting to get ready for the end of life, because perhaps family members or friends have not been able to talk to them about death and dying for various reasons. A death cafe for those people in particular can be a really supportive place and safe place to just be able to talk about death and dying. And it's not only for people at the end of life. All kinds of people attend death cafes, and there was certainly a mix of ages and experience at the death cafe that I went to the other day.
Were there like counsellors guiding the experience, or?
No, so there was a facilitator. There's not always a facilitator. Sometimes it's a bit more loose, but it's important, I guess, for me to mention it's not a grief counselling group, so it's different than a grief counselling group. It's not there to support people's grief and loss experience. It's more there to have a safe and open and welcoming space to be able to just discuss any issues that are related to death and dying.
Okay.
Yeah.
You said before that when you spent that 4 days in hospital, you came to like an acceptance of death. Is it, for some people, do they have to, like, even though you accept it in the moment, you know how they say healing is an up and down process? Does it come back? Like, once you accept, does it?
Yeah, definitely. So I think the best way for me to answer this question is by talking about the stages of grief, which some people might have heard about or read about in the past. And that concept's been around I remember it from when I was pretty young. And the person that people might know is Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And she was the person that really identified and wrote a lot about the 5 stages of grief. And since then, there's been some additions and changes made to that. So now some people talk about 6 or 7 stages of grief. But it's important for people to understand that in these stages of grief, they're not sequential. It's not a linear thing at all. You don't move through one and then go to the next one. And then once you've done one, you can go back to it. So really what these stages of grief are is that they're different ways of experiencing grief and processing and moving through grief, but they can come back, in all different types of ways. And the thing about grief is that there's so much of it in our lives. We don't even always recognise that there's things that we're grieving about, So throughout our life, we have a lot of losses, that might be loss of a relationship, loss of a job, loss of a house, loss of a child, loss of our memory, loss of our independence, all kinds of things. And loss involves grief. So grief from one event in our life can sometimes come back at another time in our life when we go through a different grief event. And sometimes we don't even really realise it because our brains are so complex and our hearts and souls are so complex, and grief is such a complex thing too. So as much as 4 days was a great way to process and understand that I was going to die, I'm sure if I get the news that I'm going to die, sometime in the future, it's still going to hit me, and it's still going to require some processing and some anger and denial and bargaining and all those stages of grief that people experience. But I feel
just
that,
very quickly, what are the? Can you name?
So there's anger, denial, bargaining, acceptance. I always forget one, so that's the 5. But I guess for me, one of the when people talk about the 6 stages of grief, the kind of the new one to the 5 is meaning, and that's a big part of one of the other things I do in my business, which is my life story sessions program as well. And I think having meaning in our life is so important for our mental health. So yeah, I think.
Just quickly tell us about your life story session.
Yeah, so Life Story Sessions is a program that I've developed as a way to, it's to help people recognise and understand that they have had a meaningful life. And that is because having a meaningful life has been correlated with really good mental health outcomes. It's although, I guess we're often feeling like we're on this quest for happiness, meaning is probably a more relevant and deeper kind of thing to strive for in life. And if we can have meaning in our life, then, we can have a better quality of life.
And would you say that we feel the gratitude deeper when we have established that meaning, or not?
Well, yeah, I think, so I've designed my program to be offered to particularly people that are perhaps in a transitional phase in their life. So perhaps they're older and they have to leave their home and go into a nursing home, or they've had a fall or an illness and have to maybe make a life change. And when people, that's coming back to grief, because that's coming back to loss. So when people are dealing with grief and loss, sometimes you feel like you've lost a part of yourself, or you've lost a big part of your life. And what my life story program is really about people looking back over their life and recognizing that they've had a lot of meaning in their life, and that even though some of those things might be gone, there's still a great deal that can be taken out of that. And that just because the things are gone now, it doesn't mean that their life doesn't have meaning now.
It's purposeful, another word that you could
attribute
to that?
That's one of the... my life story sessions goes into the different ways that we have meaning in our life, and having a purposeful life, or having purpose in your life, is one of the main parts of having of recognizing meaning in your life.
Okay, great. Well, if you wanted to chat to Briget about her life story sessions or other offerings, you can send her a message on social. I'll put the links in the show notes as well.
Sure.
Also, if you wanted some resources around death and dying, I'm pretty sure Briget will have a few that she can share with you. I know she'll be an excellent help. And Briget, my beautiful friend, thank you for being here and for being in my life, and all the best with Rhiannon's service.
Thank you, Jen, and thanks for being my friend and in my life too.